When Lena Moore whispered a dead man's name in that sterile hospital room, she thought she was protecting herself from judgment. She had no idea that single lie would summon the most dangerous man in the city to her bedside. Victor Hale doesn't do hospital visits. He doesn't claim children that aren't his. And he certainly doesn't offer protection to strangers. But when his name appeared on that birth certificate, everything changed. Now Lena must survive in a world where mercy looks like captivity, where the monster might be her only salvation, and where one desperate lie could cost her everything or give her the family she never knew she needed. Before we begin this journey through shadows and redemption, I invite you to stay with us until the very end. If you enjoy this story, please hit that like button and comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. Now, let's step into Lena's world, where one impossible phone call changed everything. What? The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hummed with the kind of persistence that made sleep impossible. Lena Moore lay in the recovery room, her body aching in ways she'd never imagined possible, her arms empty in ways that made her chest physically hurt. Through the thin curtain separating her from the hallway, she could hear other new mothers, their joyful visitors, the rustle of flower arrangements, the cooing sounds of family members meeting babies for the first time. Her side of the curtain held only silence. "Miss Moore?" The nurse who appeared was middle-aged, efficient, with eyes that had seen too many young women in Lena's exact situation. She carried a clipboard like a shield. "We need to complete the birth certificate paperwork. Father's name?" Lena's throat tightened. The truth, that she didn't know where he was, that he disappeared the moment she told him about the pregnancy, that his phone number no longer worked and his apartment had been cleared out, felt too pathetic to speak aloud. "James?" she whispered, her voice raw from hours of screaming. "James Mitchell." The nurse wrote it down without comment, without judgment, without the slightest indication that she cared whether it was truth or fiction. Address? Lena rattled off the last address she had for him, the basement apartment in the warehouse district where they'd spent 6 months pretending their relationship had a future. The nurse finished her notations and disappeared, leaving Lena alone with the antiseptic smell and the distant sound of a baby crying. Not her baby. They'd taken him to the nursery for observation. Standard procedure for premature births, they'd said, though he'd only been 3 weeks early. Lena suspected they were giving her time to rest, time to process, time to figure out what she was going to do now that she was a mother with $37 in her checking account and an eviction notice waiting at home. She must have dozed, because when she opened her eyes again, the light through the window had changed from early morning gray to late morning white. A different nurse stood at her bedside, younger, with an expression that seemed equal parts confused and concerned. "Miss Moore, there's someone here to see you." Lena's heart leaped stupidly. James, he'd come back. Somehow he'd found out, and he'd come back, and everything was going to be... He says he's the baby's father. The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. "I already gave you the father's name." "Yes, well..." The nurse shifted uncomfortably. "This gentleman has documentation. He's requesting to see both you and the infant. Hospital administration is currently reviewing the situation, but given that his name is on the official records, we can't legally prevent..." "What are you talking about?" Lena struggled to sit up, ignoring the pulling sensation in her abdomen. "I told you the father's name, James Mitchell. I don't know any gentleman with documentation." The nurse's discomfort deepened into something that looked almost like fear. "Miss Moore, the birth certificate filed this morning lists the father as Victor Hale." The name meant nothing to Lena for exactly 3 seconds. Then recognition crashed through her like ice water. Victor Hale. Everyone in the city knew that name, even people like Lena, who tried very hard to know nothing about the criminal underworld that ran beneath the city's legitimate surface. Victor Hale owned half the downtown real estate, 3/4 of the Port Authority, and allegedly the loyalty of every dirty cop and politician from here to the state capitol. Victor Hale was the kind of man whose name appeared in newspaper articles with words like alleged and suspected, but never convicted. Victor Hale was not a man who made mistakes. "That's impossible," Lena said, but her voice shook. "I've never even met Victor Hale. Why would his name be on my baby's birth certificate?" "I don't know, Miss Moore, but he's downstairs right now, and he's very insistent about seeing you. Call security. Call the police. I don't care who he is. He can't just claim someone else's child." The nurse's expression suggested that Victor Hale could, in fact, do exactly that. Would you like me to tell him you're refusing visitors? Lena wanted to scream yes. She wanted to demand answers, to understand how her simple lie had transformed into this nightmare, to protect her son from whatever fresh hell was about to walk through that door. But beneath the fear was something else, something calculating. If Victor Hale was here, there was a reason. Men like that didn't waste time on meaningless gestures, and if there was a reason, maybe, just maybe, she could use it. "Send him in," she said quietly, "but I want a nurse in the room the entire time." The young nurse looked relieved to have any instruction to follow. She disappeared through the curtain, and Lena heard hushed conversations, the squeak of expensive shoes on linoleum, the kind of deference in people's voices that came from either deep respect or deeper fear. When the curtain pulled back again, Lena understood it was definitely fear. Victor Hale was not what she expected. She'd imagined someone older, harder, with the kind of obvious menace that came from a lifetime of violence. Instead, the man who stepped into her recovery room looked like he could have been a corporate executive. Mid-30s, tall and lean, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lena's entire yearly salary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his face clean-shaven, his movements controlled and precise. But his eyes were the color of winter ice, and when they settled on Lena, she felt the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. "Miss Moore." His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I apologize for the dramatic circumstances of our meeting." Two men had followed him into the room, security clearly, though they wore suits instead of uniforms. They positioned themselves by the door with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. The nurse who'd promised to stay looked like she wanted to bolt, but she held her ground by the medical equipment, trying to appear invisible. "You're not the father of my child," Lena said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I don't know what kind of mistake was made with the paperwork, but no mistake." Victor moved closer to the bed, not threatening, but deliberate. "The paperwork is exactly as I instructed it to be filed. Your son's birth certificate lists me as his father because, legally speaking, that's what I am." "That's insane. I've never even seen you before today." "No, but you've seen James Mitchell." Victor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold eyes. "Your ex-boyfriend. The man whose name you gave to the intake nurse this morning." Lena's stomach dropped. "How do you—" "James Mitchell worked for me for approximately 18 months. During that time, he stole something of considerable value from my personal collection. When confronted, he claimed to have insurance, specifically a pregnant girlfriend who knew nothing about his criminal activities. He suggested that if anything unfortunate happened to him, his child would be left fatherless, and he'd left instructions with his lawyer to ensure certain information reached the authorities." The room seemed to tilt. Lena gripped the bed rail, trying to process what she was hearing. "You're saying James, he used our baby as leverage against you?" "Precisely. A rather clever insurance policy, assuming I'm the kind of man who can be manipulated by such tactics." Victor's tone suggested he was not that kind of man. 3 months ago, James Mitchell disappeared. My people have been searching for him ever since. Yesterday, I received a very interesting call from a contact within the hospital administration system. Someone filed a birth certificate listing James Mitchell as the father of a newborn boy. "So you just decided to put your own name on it instead?" "I decided to claim what was legally mine." Victor pulled a folded document from his inner jacket pocket, offering it to Lena. "This is the contract your boyfriend signed when he took my money and my trust. Section 12, paragraph 4. In the event of his death or permanent disappearance, all assets and obligations transfer to me. That includes, according to his own written testimony, parental rights to any offspring." Lena stared at the document but didn't take it. "That's not legal. You can't just buy someone's child." "You'd be surprised what's legal when you have the right lawyers." Victor returned the paper to his pocket. "But you're right that it's complicated, which is why I'm here to make you an offer." "I don't want your offer. I want you to leave." "Your son is in the NICU with mild respiratory issues. The hospital bills are currently around $12,000 and climbing. You were evicted from your apartment last week. Yes, I know about that too. You have no job, no family in the city, and according to your credit history, you're barely surviving as it is. Without my intervention, Child Protective Services will become involved within 48 hours. Each word hit like a physical blow, because each word was true. Lena had been trying not to think about what came after the hospital, trying to convince herself that she'd figure something out, that maternal instinct would somehow translate into rent money and job opportunities. "What do you want?" she whispered. Victor's expression softened, just fractionally. "I want to recover what James Mitchell stole from me. I want to ensure he never uses your child as leverage again. And I want to make certain that an innocent baby doesn't suffer because his biological father was a thief and a coward. By claiming him as your own, by offering him protection, and by extension, offering you the same." Victor gestured to one of his men, who produced another document, this one much thicker. "This is a standard protection contract. You and your son will be provided with secure housing, medical care, and a monthly stipend sufficient for all reasonable needs. In exchange, you'll reside in a location of my choosing and follow certain security protocols designed to keep you safe from my enemies and from James Mitchell should he resurface." Lena laughed, the sound harsh and slightly hysterical. "You mean I become your prisoner?" "You become my responsibility. There's a significant difference." "For how long?" "Until the threat is resolved, until James Mitchell is found and my property is recovered, until I'm certain that your son will never be used as a pawn in someone else's game." "And if I refuse?" Victor was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Lena heard her answer. She'd be on her own. The hospital would report her situation to social services. She'd lose her son before she ever really had him. The best-case scenario was a homeless shelter and a years-long legal battle to regain custody. The worst-case scenario was James coming back, finding her vulnerable, using their son for whatever desperate scheme had driven him to steal from a man like Victor Hale in the first place. "This isn't a choice," she said bitterly. "No," Victor agreed, "but I'm offering you safety, security, and time to figure out what you want your life to look like once this is over. That's more than you have right now." He wasn't wrong. Lena hated that he wasn't wrong. "I want to see my baby first. Before I agree to anything, I want to see him." Victor nodded to the nurse who'd been witnessing this entire exchange with wide eyes. "Bring the infant here, please, and ensure we have privacy." The nurse practically ran from the room. One of Victor's security team went with her, presumably to make sure she actually followed the instruction. The other remained by the door, stoic and unreadable. "What did he steal?" Lena asked. "James. What was worth all this?" "A family heirloom. A ring that belonged to my mother." Lena had expected drugs, weapons, money, not jewelry. "You're doing all this for a ring?" Victor's eyes hardened. "My mother died when I was 12 years old. That ring is the only thing I have of hers. Its monetary value is irrelevant. Its personal value is incalculable. James Mitchell knew that when he took it, which is why he took it. He wanted insurance that I couldn't kill him without consequences. So instead, you're taking his child." "I'm protecting his child from being used the same way that ring was used. If you can't see the difference, Miss Moore, then you don't understand the kind of danger you're in." Before Lena could respond, the door opened again. The nurse returned, pushing a clear bassinet on wheels. Inside, wrapped in white and blue hospital blankets, was the smallest person Lena had ever seen. Her son. She'd glimpsed him briefly after the delivery, a squalling red thing that the nurses had whisked away before she could really process what was happening. Now, looking at his tiny, perfect face, his miniature fists, the dark, downy hair that reminded her painfully of James, Lena felt something crack open in her chest. "Can I hold him?" Her voice came out broken. The nurse carefully lifted the baby, showing Lena how to support his head, how to cradle him against her chest. He was so light, so impossibly fragile, and when his eyes fluttered open, dark blue, unfocused, searching, Lena started to cry. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "Hey, I'm your mom. I know I'm a mess, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I promise I'm going to figure it out. I promise I'm going to keep you safe." From the corner of her eyes, she saw Victor watching them. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture had changed, softened slightly. "What's his name?" Victor asked quietly. Lena hadn't thought about it. She'd been so focused on just surviving the pregnancy, on just getting through the delivery, that she hadn't let herself imagine a future where she was actually raising this child. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I wanted to meet him first, to see who he was before I decided." Victor moved closer, close enough that Lena tensed, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at this baby, studying him with an intensity that seemed almost clinical. "May I?" He gestured to the chair beside the bed. Lena nodded, too surprised to refuse. Victor sat, and in that moment, he looked less like a crime lord and more like just a man, tired perhaps, or thoughtful, or something else she couldn't identify. "He has your nose," Victor observed, "and your chin, but the eyes, those are Mitchell's." "I know." Lena touched her son's tiny cheek, marveling at the softness. "I keep trying to decide if that's going to make this harder or easier." "It's going to make it complicated." Victor's voice was matter of fact. "You'll look at him and see the man who abandoned you, but you'll also see yourself and the person he could become, and that will matter more." "You sound like you have experience with complicated family situations." "My father was not a good man, but he taught me valuable lessons about what kind of man I didn't want to become." Victor stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. "I'll give you the rest of today to rest and to think about my offer. Tomorrow morning, I'll return for your answer. Whatever you decide, I'll ensure the hospital bills are covered and that you have safe transport to wherever you choose to go." Lena looked up from her son's face. "And if I say no? If I take my chances on my own? Then I wish you the best, Miss Moore, but I'll also have my people watching from a distance. Because whether you accept my protection or not, that boy is now connected to me through public record. If James Mitchell comes looking, he won't see a struggling single mother. He'll see leverage against Victor Hale, and that makes you both targets, whether you want to be or not." It was a threat wrapped in concern, and they both knew it. But as Lena held her newborn son, feeling his heartbeat against her chest, she couldn't deny the cold logic. She'd already made herself a target when she'd spoken James's name. Victor was just offering to control the damage. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." Victor moved toward the door, his security team falling into formation around him. But he paused at the threshold, looking back. "For what it's worth, Miss Moore, I hope you choose safety. That child deserves better than to be a pawn in someone else's war." Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with her son and a decision that felt impossible. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nurses checking vitals, doctors explaining care instructions, and social workers asking careful questions about her support system. Lena answered mechanically, her mind circling the same thoughts over and over. She could run, take the baby and disappear to another city, another state, somewhere James would never find them. But she had no money for running, no contacts in other places, no way to support herself and a newborn while constantly looking over her shoulder. She could go to the police, tell them about Victor's offer, about the forged birth certificate, about all of it. But what could they do? Victor Hale had never been successfully prosecuted for anything. He had lawyers, politicians, entire systems in his pocket, and bringing the authorities into it would just make her a bigger target, a loose end that needed to be tied up. Or she could accept, live in a gilded cage for however long it took Victor to find James and recover his mother's ring, keep her son safe and fed and warm while she figured out some kind of plan for their future. As the sun set outside her window, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Lena made her choice. It wasn't really a choice. Victor had been right about that, but she could at least own it, could at least acknowledge that she was doing this with open eyes. When her son started to fuss, she fumbled with the hospital gown, trying to figure out the mechanics of nursing. A kind nurse appeared, showing her how to position him, how to help him latch, murmuring encouragement when Lena was sure she was doing everything wrong. "You're doing great, honey," the nurse said. "First-time mothers always think they're failing, but look at him. He knows exactly what to do." Lena looked down at her son, his eyes closed in concentration, his tiny hand curled against her skin. The nurse was right. He knew what to do. He was fighting to survive, to thrive, to grow despite being born into the worst possible circumstances. She could do the same. That night, Lena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor's face, heard his calm voice explaining how her life was no longer her own. But she also heard his words about her son deserving better, about protection, about safety. Morning came too quickly. Lena had just finished feeding the baby again when she heard the commotion in the hallway, the same deferential voices, the same heavy footsteps. This time, she was ready. Victor entered alone, leaving his security team outside. He looked exactly as he had yesterday, perfectly composed, perfectly controlled. Only his eyes showed any emotion, and even that was carefully banked. "Miss Moore, have you made your decision?" Lena adjusted the baby in her arms, using him as both shield and strength. I have questions first. Of course. This housing you're providing, where is it? A secure apartment in the Riverside district, 3 bedrooms, fully furnished, 24-hour security. You'll have your own entrance, your own space. My people will be present, but not intrusive. Can I leave? Go to the store, take the baby for walks, live any kind of normal life? Within reason. You'll have a security detail anytime you leave the building. No international travel, no contact with anyone from your previous life without clearing it through my team first. So prison. So safety. Victor's tone didn't change. Miss Moore, I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because James Mitchell is a desperate man who made very powerful enemies. When desperate men get cornered, they do desperate things. I won't let you or your son become collateral damage. Lena studied his face, searching for deception, for the monster she expected to find. But all she saw was exhaustion and determination, and something that might have been genuine concern. What's your endgame? What happens when you find James and get your ring back? You're free to leave, with a substantial settlement to help you start over, letters of recommendation for employment, and the assurance that any threats against you have been permanently resolved. Resolved, Lena repeated. You mean killed. I mean resolved. Victor moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight shadow of exhaustion beneath his perfect composure. I don't expect you to like me, Miss Moore. I don't expect gratitude or trust or anything beyond your compliance with the security measures designed to keep you alive. But I do expect you to be smart enough to recognize when you're out of options. And my son, what's his role in all this? For the first time, Victor's expression truly softened. He looked at the baby in Lena's arms, and something ancient and painful flickered across his face. Your son has no role. He's an infant who deserves to grow up safe and healthy, with a mother who loves him and opportunities that aren't limited by the mistakes of his biological father. That's all I want for him. Why? Lena's voice cracked. Why do you care? You could just find James, get your ring back, and forget we exist. Why go to all this trouble? Victor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more human than she'd heard it. Because my mother wore that ring every day of her life. Because she died protecting me from my father's enemies, and the last thing she said to me was that I should always protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Because that baby didn't choose his father, and he shouldn't pay for his father's sins. He paused. And because I have the power to help, and choosing not to use that power makes me complicit in whatever happens to you. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Lena in months, maybe years, and despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the impossible situation, she believed him. Okay, she said quietly, I'll accept your protection, but I have conditions. Victor's eyebrow rose slightly. I'm listening. I want to name my son, not you, not some lawyer, not anyone else. That's my right as his mother. Agreed. I want regular updates on your search for James. I'm not going to sit in some apartment wondering what's happening or when this is going to end. Within reason, there are operational details that must remain confidential, but I can provide general progress reports. And I want your promise that when this is over, when James is found and dealt with, you'll correct that birth certificate. My son deserves to know the truth about his parentage, even if his father was a bastard. Victor considered this longer. If that's what you want, yes. Though you should know that having my name on that certificate provides him certain protections and advantages that James Mitchell's name never could. I understand, but it's also a lie, and I don't want my son's whole life built on a lie. Very well. Victor extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Lena looked at his hand, then at her son, then back at the man who'd just claimed ownership of their lives. She shifted the baby to one arm and accepted the handshake. We have an agreement. Victor's grip was firm but brief. I'll have the apartment prepared and arrange for your discharge this afternoon. A private car will bring you and your son to your new home. My assistant, Margaret, will meet you there to help you get settled and answer any questions. That's it? We just leave? The hospital has already processed your release paperwork. All bills have been settled. You'll find appropriate clothing and baby supplies waiting at the apartment. If you need anything specific, Margaret will arrange it. It was too easy, too smooth, too much like a trap closing around her. But Lena had already made her choice. All that remained was to live with the consequences. Thank you, she said, the words tasting strange in her mouth. Victor nodded once, then turned to leave. But at the door, he paused again. Miss Moore? What are you going to name him? Lena looked down at her son, at his peaceful sleeping face, at the future she was trying to build from the wreckage of her present. Ethan, she said. His name is Ethan. Ethan. Victor tested the name, seemed to approve. It's a good name, strong. It means firm, enduring, long-lived. I know, that's why I chose it. Something that might have been a smile touched Victor's lips. Then I'll see you both soon, Miss Moore. Welcome to your new life. He left, and Lena was alone again with Ethan and the terrifying knowledge that she'd just made a deal with the devil himself. But as she held her son close, breathing in his new baby smell and feeling his warmth against her heart, she couldn't regret it. She'd do anything to keep him safe. Even this, even becoming the protected prisoner of the city's most dangerous man. Even trusting that somewhere beneath Victor Hale's cold exterior was the boy who'd lost his mother too young, who'd kept her ring as a promise, who understood what it meant to protect the vulnerable. Lena pressed her lips to Ethan's forehead and whispered a promise of her own. Whatever happens, baby, I've got you. And I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing you're loved. That's my job now. That's all that matters. Outside her window, the city sprawled beneath a weak winter sun. Millions of lives intersecting and diverging, stories beginning and ending, choices made and consequences accepted. Somewhere out there, James Mitchell was running or hiding or plotting his next move. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was orchestrating a search that would end in blood and resolution. But here, in this moment, Lena held her son and tried to believe that accepting Victor's protection wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was survival. It was the first move in a much longer game, one where the stakes were Ethan's future, and the prize was something she'd never really had before. Freedom to choose her own path, once the shadows finally cleared. The private car that arrived for Lena wasn't what she expected. She'd imagined something ostentatious, a limousine with tinted windows, and the kind of presence that screamed criminal enterprise. Instead, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the hospital's side entrance, so ordinary it could have belonged to any business executive in the city. The driver was a woman in her 50s, professional and efficient, who introduced herself as Margaret Chen before helping Lena into the back seat with Ethan. The baby carrier had appeared in Lena's room that morning, along with a diaper bag stocked with everything she might need for the journey. Someone had thought of everything, which was both comforting and deeply unsettling. Mr. Hale asked me to ensure you're comfortable during the transition, Margaret said as they pulled into traffic. Her voice was warm but businesslike, the tone of someone who'd done this before. The apartment has been prepared according to his specifications. I'll stay for the first few days to help you get oriented and establish routines with the baby. Lena watched the city pass outside the window, familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. Do you work for Victor often, helping his, what should I call myself? His prisoners? Margaret's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, kind but firm. You're not a prisoner, Miss Moore. You're under Mr. Hale's protection, which is a very different thing. And yes, I've worked for him for 12 years. He's a complicated man, but he's never asked me to do anything that wasn't ultimately meant to help someone. He's a criminal. He's a businessman who operates in gray areas that make most people uncomfortable. But I've seen him provide college educations for employees' children, cover medical expenses that would have bankrupted families, and yes, offer protection to people who had nowhere else to turn. Whatever you think you know about Victor Hale, I promise you the reality is more nuanced. Lena wanted to argue, but Ethan chose that moment to wake up fussing. She fumbled with the carrier straps, trying to extract him without making his crying worse. Margaret pulled over smoothly, put the car in park, and turned around. Here, let me show you the quick release. Once you know where it is, you can have him out in seconds. For the next 10 minutes, Margaret patiently demonstrated baby carrier mechanics while Lena nursed Ethan in the back seat, a blanket draped over her shoulder for privacy. It felt surreal, receiving childcare advice from a crime lord's assistant while parked on a residential street like they were just two normal women helping a new mother adjust. You're good at this, Lena said quietly. Do you have children? 3, all grown now, and 2 grandchildren. Margaret's smile was genuine. Being a new mother is terrifying under the best circumstances. I can't imagine doing it under yours, but you're stronger than you think, Miss Moore. You wouldn't have survived this long otherwise. They drove for another 20 minutes. leaving behind the rundown neighborhoods Lena knew and entering an area she'd only seen from bus windows. Tree-lined streets with renovated brownstones, small parks with actual playground equipment, coffee shops that sold $5 lattes instead of dollar coffee in styrofoam cups. The Riverside District, where people who had money but not quite enough for the real luxury neighborhood settled for beautiful instead of spectacular. The building Margaret pulled up to was a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and enormous windows, with a doorman who nodded respectfully as they approached. He held the door without asking questions, without even glancing at the baby in Lena's arms, as if young women with newborns arrived under mysterious circumstances every day. Maybe in Victor's world, they did. The elevator required a key card, which Margaret produced. They rose in silence to the 8th floor, and when the doors opened, Lena found herself in a private hallway with only 2 doors. Margaret led her to the one on the left and used another key card to unlock it. "This is yours," she said simply, and pushed the door open. The apartment took Lena's breath away. The main living space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon light, and furniture that looked like it had come from a design magazine. The kitchen was open concept with marble countertops and appliances Lena didn't know the names for. Doorways led to what she assumed were bedrooms, and everything, absolutely everything, was pristine and beautiful and nothing like anywhere Lena had ever lived. "The master bedroom is through there," Margaret said, pointing. "Fully furnished, including a crib and changing table in the attached nursery. The second bedroom is set up as a guest room, and the third is currently empty. You can use it for whatever you need. Mr. Hale thought you might want a private space to work or read or just have somewhere that's entirely yours." Lena walked through the apartment in a daze, Ethan sleeping peacefully in her arms, taking in details that made her previous life feel like a distant nightmare. A bathroom with a tub big enough to lie down in. Closets filled with clothes in her size, tasteful, expensive, nothing revealing or inappropriate. Just quality basics that suggested someone had paid attention to her preferences. The nursery was painted a soft gray blue, with a rocking chair by the window, and shelves already stocked with books and toys for a baby who couldn't even focus his eyes yet. "How did he do all this?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been less than 24 hours. Mr. Hale is very efficient when he wants to be. He had a team working overnight to prepare this space." Margaret moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets to show Lena where things were. "The refrigerator and pantry are fully stocked. There's a meal service that will deliver fresh groceries twice a week, or you can request specific items any time. The building has a gym, a rooftop garden, and a small library on the 2nd floor, all accessible to you. With my security detail following me everywhere. With discreet security, yes. You won't always see them, but they'll be present." Margaret's tone was matter of fact. "Mr. Hale takes threats seriously, Miss Moore. The men watching this building are here to keep you safe, not to make you feel trapped." Lena wanted to argue that the distinction didn't matter, that safety, enforced, was still imprisonment, but Ethan stirred in her arms and she remembered why she'd agreed to this. Not for herself. For him. So he could sleep in a warm crib instead of a shelter cot, so he could grow up with opportunities instead of struggle, so he wouldn't pay for his father's sins. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do I just live here? Wait for Victor to find James and decide my fate?" "You live here, yes. You take care of your son. You rest, recover from childbirth, adjust to being a mother." Margaret's voice gentled. "This doesn't have to be a prison sentence, Miss Moore. It can be a chance to breathe, to figure out who you want to be once this situation is resolved. Mr. Hale isn't expecting anything from you except that you stay safe and let him handle the dangerous parts." "And what are the dangerous parts? What's he actually doing to find James?" Margaret hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "Mr. Hale has resources throughout the city, people who owe him favors, who provide information, who keep track of anyone moving through the criminal networks. James Mitchell can't hide forever, especially not with something as valuable as Mr. Hale's mother's ring. Eventually he'll try to sell it or use it as collateral, and when he does, we'll know. And then? And then Mr. Hale will recover his property and ensure James Mitchell can never threaten you or Ethan again." The careful phrasing didn't hide the reality. Victor was going to kill James. Maybe not personally, maybe not immediately, but eventually, inevitably, the man who'd gotten Lena pregnant and abandoned her would stop being a problem because he'd stop breathing. She should have felt something about that. Horror, or guilt, or at least moral conflict. Instead, she felt nothing. James had made his choices. He'd stolen from a dangerous man, used his unborn child as a bargaining chip, and disappeared without a second thought for the woman he'd left behind. Whatever happened to him now was justice of a sort, even if it wasn't the legal kind. "When will I see Victor again?" Lena asked. "He'll check in periodically. He's a busy man, but he takes his responsibilities seriously. In the meantime, I'm your primary point of contact." Margaret handed Lena a phone, new, expensive, with only a few numbers programmed in. "My number, Mr. Hale's direct line, building security, and emergency services. If you need anything, call. Day or night, someone will answer." Lena took the phone, adding it to the growing list of expensive things that now defined her life. "Thank you for all of this. I know you're just doing your job, but you've been kind about it." "Being kind costs nothing, Miss Moore, and you're going to need kindness in the coming weeks." Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Mr. Hale asked me to give you this." She handed Lena an envelope, thick and formal. Inside was a letter written in precise, elegant handwriting. "Miss Moore, I understand this transition is difficult. Please know that the provisions made for you and Ethan are not transactional. They come with no expectations beyond your safety and well-being. The apartment is yours for as long as you need it, regardless of how the situation with Mitchell resolves. Margaret will help you establish routines and provide whatever support you require. If at any point you have concerns or questions, you may reach me directly. You made a brave choice yesterday. I intend to honor it by ensuring you never regret placing your trust in me." V.H. Lena read it twice, searching for hidden meanings or veiled threats. But the words seemed sincere, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the cold, controlled man who'd stood in her hospital room making demands. "He's different than I expected," she said. Margaret smiled. "Most people say that eventually. Give it time, Miss Moore. You might be surprised." After Margaret left, Lena spent hours just wandering the apartment with Ethan, trying to make the space feel real. She opened every cabinet, tested every piece of furniture, stood at the windows watching the river flow past while her son slept against her chest. The sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, painting the water in colors she'd forgotten existed. Her old apartment had faced a brick wall. She'd woken up every morning to gray and shadows. Here, light poured in from 3 directions, and even at night the city glowed beyond the glass like a promise of possibility. She fed Ethan in the rocking chair, changed him on the expensive changing table with its built-in warmers and organized drawers, bathed him carefully in the nursery sink using techniques Margaret had demonstrated. Every task felt surreal, like she was playing house in someone else's life. But Ethan was real. His cries were real, and the exhaustion settling into her bones was definitely real. Around midnight, after Ethan finally fell asleep in his crib, Lena stood in the nursery doorway watching him breathe. Such a tiny person to have caused such enormous chaos. If she hadn't gotten pregnant, James would have just been a bad relationship, a mistake she'd learned from. She'd have moved on, found a new job, rebuilt her life brick by brick. Instead, she was here, in a beautiful cage waiting for a dangerous man to resolve her problems with violence. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her sleeping son. "I'm sorry your father was a criminal, and your mother was naive enough to love him. I'm sorry you got dragged into this before you were even born, but I promise I'm going to make it right somehow. I'm going to figure out how to give you a real life once we're free of all this." Ethan slept on, oblivious to promises and problems alike. Lena retreated to the master bedroom, climbed into sheets that probably cost more than her old monthly rent, and tried to sleep. She managed maybe 3 hours before Ethan's cries woke her. Feed, change, rock, sleep. Feed, change, rock, sleep. The cycle repeated until dawn broke over the river, and Lena watched the sunrise from the nursery window while Ethan nursed, and wondered if this was what her life would be now, beautiful monotony punctuated by fear. Margaret returned mid-morning with fresh groceries and a matter-of-fact efficiency that made Lena feel slightly less insane. They established routines, discussed feeding schedules, talked about the logistics of new motherhood like this was a normal situation instead of protective custody. "Has Victor found anything?" Lena asked on the 3rd day. "About James?" "Mr. Hale's investigation is ongoing. These things take time." Margaret was folding baby clothes, creating perfect little rectangles that Lena would never be able to replicate. "James Mitchell is a survivor. He knows how to disappear, but everyone makes mistakes eventually. What if he doesn't? What if he's just gone and we never find him? Then you stay safe here until Mr. Hale is confident there's no remaining threat. He won't leave you vulnerable, Miss Moore. That's not how he operates. Lena wanted to push, to demand timelines and guarantees, but Ethan started crying and the conversation dissolved into discussions about whether the baby might have colic or just gas. Normal mother things. Safe things. Things that didn't involve crime lords and stolen rings and disappeared ex-boyfriends. The days blended together. Lena learned the rhythms of her son's needs, the patterns of light through the windows, the sounds of the building settling around her. She saw the security team occasionally, different faces rotating through shifts, always professional, always distant. They nodded when she passed in the hallway, but never spoke unless she initiated conversation. On the 8th day, Victor came. Lena was in the living room trying to convince Ethan that morning naps were beneficial when she heard the key card in the lock. She tensed, pulling Ethan closer before reminding herself that Victor owned this apartment, had provided everything in it. He didn't need to break in. He entered quietly, dressed more casually than she'd seen him. Dark jeans, a sweater, no tie. It made him look younger, more human. He carried a large shopping bag that he set carefully on the counter. "Miss Moore, I hope I'm not intruding." "It's your apartment," Lena said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "You can intrude whenever you want." "Legally, perhaps, but I prefer to respect boundaries when possible." Victor moved into the living room but maintained distance, not crowding her space. "How are you settling in?" "We're surviving. Ethan sleeps in 3-hour blocks if I'm lucky. I haven't slept more than 4 hours consecutively in over a week, and I'm living in a beautiful apartment paid for by a man who's probably going to murder my ex-boyfriend. So, normal new mother stuff." A ghost of a smile touched Victor's lips. "Your honesty is refreshing. Most people in your position would pretend everything was fine." "I'm too tired to pretend." Lena shifted Ethan to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "Did you come here for a reason, or is this just a wellness check?" "Both, actually. I wanted to see how you were managing, and I brought something I thought you might appreciate." He gestured to the bag on the counter. "Books. Margaret mentioned you'd been asking about the building library, so I gathered some things from my personal collection." Lena blinked, surprised. "You read?" "Voraciously. One of the few hobbies my lifestyle permits." Victor pulled volumes from the bag, not crime thrillers or business texts, but novels, poetry, philosophy. "I wasn't sure what you'd enjoy, so I brought variety. If none of these appeal to you, I can have Margaret arrange access to bookstores or online ordering." It was such a normal, thoughtful gesture that Lena didn't know how to respond. She'd expected Victor to be cruel or controlling, or at least coldly indifferent. Instead, he was standing in her living room discussing literature like they were colleagues instead of captor and captive. "Thank you," she said finally. "I used to read all the time before everything. I miss it." "Then I hope these help." Victor moved to the windows, looking out at the river view he'd provided. "I also wanted to update you on the search for Mitchell." Lena's breath caught. "You found him?" "Not yet. But we've confirmed he's still in the city. One of my contacts spotted someone matching his description in the warehouse district 3 days ago. We're narrowing the search. And when you find him?" Victor turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I'll recover my property. I'll ensure he can never use you or Ethan as leverage again. And I'll make certain he understands the consequences of betraying my trust." "You're going to kill him." "I'm going to resolve the situation permanently. The specific method is less important than the result." Lena should have been horrified. Should have demanded he involve the police, let the legal system handle it, do literally anything other than murder. But looking at Victor's calm face, holding her infant son who existed because of James Mitchell's selfishness, she couldn't find the moral high ground. "I won't mourn him," she said quietly. "Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you honest about a complicated situation." Victor moved closer, and Lena noticed he was watching Ethan with something that looked almost like longing. "May I?" "May you what?" "Hold him, just for a moment. I promise I'm not completely incompetent with children." Lena's instinct was to refuse, to keep her baby away from this dangerous man. But something in Victor's expression stopped her, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Support his head," she said, transferring Ethan carefully. "And don't panic if he cries. He cries at everything." Victor accepted the baby with surprising confidence, cradling him against his chest with practiced ease. Ethan studied Victor's face with unfocused intensity, his tiny hand grabbing at Victor's sweater. "Hello, Ethan," Victor said softly. "You're causing quite a bit of trouble for being so small." Lena watched them together, this impossible tableau, a crime lord and an infant, connected by lies and legal documents and circumstances neither had chosen. Victor looked different holding Ethan, less controlled, more real. "You're good at that," she observed. "The baby holding thing." "I have younger cousins. Had, rather. Most of them are grown now." Victor's voice was distant, remembering. "But I spent several years being the designated babysitter at family gatherings. Apparently crime lords are born from somewhere." "Do you see them? Your family?" "No. When I chose this life, I chose to protect them from it. Distance is safer for everyone involved." He traced a finger along Ethan's tiny palm, and the baby's fingers curled around it reflexively. "But I remember what it was like being trusted with something so precious, the weight of that responsibility." "Is that what this is? Why you're helping us? Some kind of redemption through responsibility?" Victor looked up from Ethan's face, meeting Lena's eyes. "Maybe partially, but mostly it's because I have the power to help, and choosing not to would make me the kind of man my mother would have been ashamed of." "The mother whose ring James stole?" "Yes." Victor's jaw tightened. "She would have liked you, I think. She valued strength in the face of impossible circumstances, and she believed children deserved protection above all else." "What happened to her? You said your father's enemies?" "Killed her when I was 12. She was collateral damage in a war she never asked to be part of." Victor handed Ethan back carefully, and Lena saw grief flash across his face. "I swore that day I'd never let anyone use the people I cared about as weapons. It's a promise I've kept even when it's been difficult." "And now you care about us? About people you barely know?" "I care about preventing unnecessary suffering. The specifics matter less than the principle." Victor moved toward the door, his walls rebuilding themselves. "I should go. I have meetings, but I wanted to check on you both and provide the update." "Victor." He paused at his name. "When this is over, when James is gone and the threat is resolved, what happens to Ethan's birth certificate? You promised you'd correct it." "I did. And I will, if that's still what you want." Victor studied her for a moment. "But you should know that keeping my name on that document provides Ethan certain protections. Educational opportunities, business connections, a legacy that could open doors your son might never access otherwise. A legacy built on lies and crime. A legacy built on power and resources. How those things were acquired is less relevant than how they're used." Victor's expression was serious. "I'm not asking you to decide now, but think about it, Miss Moore. Think about what you want your son's future to look like, and whether pride is more important than possibility." He left before Lena could respond, his security team materializing from wherever they'd been waiting. The door locked automatically behind them, and Lena was alone again with Ethan, and questions that had no good answers. She looked down at her son, who'd fallen asleep during the conversation, his face peaceful and innocent. "Your life is so complicated already," she whispered, "and you're not even 2 weeks old. How did we get here, baby? How did everything get so tangled up?" Ethan slept on, dreaming whatever newborns dreamed. Lena carried him to the nursery, placed him gently in his crib, and stood watching him breathe. Outside the windows, the city sprawled beneath a gray sky, and somewhere in those streets, James Mitchell was hiding, and Victor Hale was hunting, and Lena was caught between them with only her love for her son as a compass. She thought about Victor's offer, the legacy, the protection, the possibilities. She thought about pride and truth, and what she owed Ethan beyond just survival. And she thought about the man who'd held her baby with such gentleness, who read poetry and honored his dead mother's memory, who was probably going to commit murder in Lena's name and considered it a moral obligation. The world wasn't black and white. She'd known that intellectually, but living it was different. Living it meant making impossible choices and learning to accept that sometimes the monster was also the hero, and sometimes safety came from the most dangerous source. Lena returned to the living room and picked up one of the books Victor had brought, a collection of poetry by someone she'd never heard of. She opened it randomly and found a passage marked with a folded corner. "We are all monsters and saints," the poem read. "The question is which version of ourselves we feed." She wondered which version of himself Victor fed. She wondered which version of herself she was becoming. And she wondered if, by the time this was over, she'd even recognize the woman looking back from the mirror. 3 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of domesticity and underlying tension. Lena fell into the patterns of new motherhood, sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, the peculiar intimacy of being needed so completely by such a small person. Margaret visited daily, offering advice and companionship, never mentioning the real reason Lena was living in this beautiful prison. The security team rotated their shifts with military precision, silent sentinels, who protected her from threats she tried not to think about. Victor came twice more during those weeks, always bringing something: books, baby clothes in the next size up, once a mobile for Ethan's crib that played soft classical music. He never stayed long, never demanded anything, just checked on them with a concern that seemed genuine beneath his controlled exterior. Lena found herself looking forward to those visits, which troubled her more than she wanted to admit. On a Tuesday morning, when Ethan was nearly a month old, everything changed. Lena was folding laundry, something she'd never expected to find meditative but had become a welcome mindless task, when her phone rang. Victor's number. He'd never called before, always appeared in person or sent Margaret with messages. "Hello? Miss Moore." His voice was tighter than usual, strained. "I need you to listen carefully and do exactly as I say. There's been a development." Lena's hands went cold. "What kind of development?" "James Mitchell made contact. He wants to negotiate." Victor's words came fast, clipped. "He's offering to return the ring in exchange for money and safe passage out of the country. He also wants to see you and Ethan." "Absolutely not." The refusal was automatic, visceral. "He doesn't get to see us. He gave up that right when he disappeared." "I agree. But he's threatening to go to the press if we don't agree to his terms. He's prepared to tell them I kidnapped you and forged Ethan's birth certificate, that I'm holding you hostage to force his cooperation." Lena sat down hard on the couch, her legs suddenly unreliable. "Is he insane? Going public would expose him too. He'd be admitting to theft, to... Desperate men do desperate things. And James is cornered. My people have been closing in on him for weeks. This is his last play." Victor paused, and she heard voices in the background, sharp and urgent. "I'm handling it, but I need you to be prepared for the possibility that this situation may escalate quickly." "What does that mean?" "Escalate how?" "It means James may try to get to you directly. It means the security around your building is being tripled as we speak. It means I need you to stay inside, keep your phone with you at all times, and trust that I won't let anything happen to you or Ethan." Trust. Such a loaded word. Lena looked at Ethan sleeping peacefully in his bouncer, oblivious to the chaos swirling around his tiny existence. "Where's James now?" "We're tracking him. He's moving, trying to stay ahead of us. But he can't hide forever." Victor's voice softened fractionally. "Lena, I promise you, this will be over soon. One way or another, James Mitchell will stop being a threat to your family." He'd called them her family. Not just Ethan, but both of them. The intimacy of it caught Lena off guard. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay safe, stay alert. And if anything feels wrong, you call me immediately. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning or if you think you're being paranoid. You call." "Okay?" Lena's voice was steadier than she felt. "Victor, be careful. Whatever you're planning, just be careful." There was a long pause. When Victor spoke again, his tone held something she'd never heard from him before. Warmth, maybe, or gratitude. "I will. I'll check on you tonight." The line went dead. Lena sat holding the phone, staring at Ethan, trying to process the fear clawing at her chest. James was out there, desperate and dangerous, willing to destroy everything to save himself, and Victor was hunting him with the single-minded focus of a predator who'd been personally insulted. She should have felt safe, protected by Victor's resources and determination. Instead, she felt like the eye of a hurricane, waiting for the storm to hit. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Margaret arrived earlier than usual, her normally calm demeanor slightly frayed. "Mr. Hale asked me to stay with you today," she said, unpacking groceries with sharp, efficient movements. "Just as a precaution." "Did he tell you about James?" "He told me there's been contact. That's all I need to know." Margaret met Lena's eyes. "But I've worked for Mr. Hale long enough to recognize when a situation is coming to a head. He's been preparing for this since the day you arrived here." "Preparing how?" Margaret hesitated, clearly weighing her words. Mr. Hale doesn't take threats lightly. When someone steals from him, when someone uses innocent people as leverage, he responds with overwhelming force. James Mitchell made the mistake of thinking he could negotiate from a position of weakness. He's about to learn differently. The certainty in Margaret's voice should have been comforting. Instead, it made Lena's skin crawl. She'd accepted Victor's protection, had agreed to this arrangement, but she'd managed to keep the violence abstract, something that happened in shadows she didn't have to witness. Now it was rushing toward her with the inevitability of a freight train. Afternoon faded into evening. Lena fed Ethan, changed him, rocked him to sleep while watching the sun set over the river. The beauty of it felt wrong somehow, nature indifferent to human drama. Margaret made dinner, real food, not the takeout Lena had been surviving on, and they ate in companionable silence, two women waiting for news neither wanted to receive. At 8:30, Lena's phone rang again. Victor. It's happening tonight, he said without preamble. James agreed to meet. He thinks he's negotiating. He's wrong. Where? The warehouse district where you used to live with him. Poetic in its way. Victor's voice was cold now, emptied of the warmth from their earlier call. This was the crime lord speaking, not the man who read poetry and held babies with gentleness. I'm going personally. I want him to see who he betrayed. Victor, wait! But Lena didn't know what to say. Don't go? Don't kill him? Be safe? All of it felt inadequate. I'll call you when it's over. Keep your phone close. Please. The line went dead before she could finish. Lena stared at the phone, her heart hammering. Margaret watched from across the room, her expression knowing. He'll be fine, Margaret said quietly. Mr. Hale has survived far worse than James Mitchell. It's not Victor I'm worried about. The words came out before Lena could stop them, and they were true. She was worried about James, about what was going to happen to him, about having to live with the knowledge that a man had died because of her. But more than that, she was worried about what it meant that she'd started thinking of Victor as something other than her captor. The hours that followed were the longest of Lena's life. She tried to read, to watch television, to focus on anything other than what was happening in those abandoned warehouses. Margaret eventually convinced her to try to sleep, but Lena just lay in the dark, listening to Ethan breathe through the baby monitor, jumping at every sound from the hallway. At 11:43, her phone finally rang. It's done. Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. James is dead. The ring is recovered. The threat is over. Lena sat up in bed, her whole body trembling. What happened? He tried to run when he realized it was a trap. There was gunfire. He didn't survive. Victor paused. It was clean, if that matters. Quick. He didn't suffer. Was it you? Did you? Does it matter who pulled the trigger? He's dead because he stole from me and used your child as a weapon. The specific mechanics are irrelevant. But it did matter somehow. Lena needed to know if the man who brought her books and held her son had personally killed Ethan's biological father. She needed to know which version of Victor was real, the monster or the protector. Tell me the truth, she demanded. Did you kill him yourself? Victor was silent for so long that Lena thought he might refuse to answer. When he spoke, his voice was different, tired, maybe, or resigned. Yes, I killed him. He looked me in the eyes and tried to bargain with your life, and I shot him. Twice. Once for the ring, once for threatening you and Ethan. That's the truth you asked for. Lena should have felt horror, should have been repulsed, terrified, desperate to escape this man who just admitted to murder. Instead, she felt a strange numbness, followed by something that might have been relief. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Victor sounded genuinely surprised. That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? That I'm grateful, horrified? I don't know what I feel right now, Victor. James is dead and I should care, but all I can think is that Ethan is safe now. That we're safe. Does that make me a monster too? It makes you human. Victor's voice softened. I'm coming to see you. I need to see that you're both all right. Is that acceptable? Lena looked at the clock. Nearly midnight. Now? Now, I won't stay long. I just need... He trailed off, and Lena heard something she'd never expected from Victor Hale. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded. Come, she said. We're awake anyway. She told Margaret, who'd been dozing on the couch. The older woman just nodded, unsurprised, and went to make coffee. Lena checked on Ethan, changed into clothes that weren't pajamas, and tried to prepare herself for whatever version of Victor was about to walk through that door. When he arrived 20 minutes later, he looked nothing like the composed businessman she'd grown accustomed to. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled, and there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and she'd just been refusing to see it. Margaret handed him coffee and disappeared into the guest room with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew when to make herself scarce. Lena and Victor stood in the living room, the city glittering beyond the windows, a dead man's ghost between them. "Are you hurt?" Lena asked, because she had to say something. No. James wasn't much of a fighter when it came down to it, just a coward with a gun who thought desperation gave him power. Victor set his coffee down untouched. "Can I see Ethan?" The request was so unexpected, so nakedly vulnerable, that Lena just nodded and led him to the nursery. Ethan was awake, staring at the mobile above his crib with the intense focus babies brought to everything. When he saw them, his face broke into something that might have been a smile or might have been gas, and Lena's heart clenched. Victor approached the crib slowly, like he was afraid he might break something. "Hello, little one. You're safe now. I made sure of it." "Do you want to hold him?" Lena asked softly. Victor looked at her, something desperate in his expression. "I have blood on my hands. Not literally. I washed them, but metaphorically. I just killed a man. I shouldn't. You killed a man to protect us. If that makes you unfit to hold a baby, then I don't know what parenting is." Lena lifted Ethan from the crib and placed him in Victor's arms before he could protest further. Victor accepted the baby with the same careful precision he brought to everything, but his hands were shaking slightly. Ethan grabbed at his fingers, making small cooing sounds, and Lena watched Victor's face transform. The hardness melted away, replaced by something tender and broken and achingly human. "He doesn't know," Victor said quietly, "what I did tonight, what I am. He just sees someone holding him, someone who might keep him safe. Isn't that what matters? The safety, not the methods?" Victor looked at her over Ethan's head. "You're not horrified by what I told you, by what I did. Why?" Lena sat in the rocking chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I should be. I know I should be. But James made his choices. He stole from you. He abandoned me pregnant and alone. He used our unborn child as leverage in his criminal schemes. I loved him once, or thought I did, but that man disappeared long before you killed him tonight. All you did was make it official. That's a dangerously pragmatic view of murder. I'm a single mother living under the protection of a crime lord because my ex-boyfriend was stupid enough to steal from said crime lord. Pragmatism is pretty much all I have left." Lena leaned her head back against the chair. "Besides, you promised to keep us safe. You kept that promise. Everything else is just details." "Details." Victor laughed, the sound bitter. "I took a life tonight, Lena. That's not a detail." "No, it's a choice. The same choice you make every day in your business, I assume. The same choice I made when I agreed to come here instead of taking my chances alone." She met his eyes. "We're all just trying to survive in a world that doesn't care about our morality. You have your methods, I have mine. At least you're honest about the violence instead of pretending it doesn't exist." Victor was quiet for a long moment, rocking Ethan gently. The baby's eyes were starting to droop, lulled by the movement and the warmth. Outside, the city hummed with its endless nighttime energy, indifferent to the drama playing out in this small nursery. "What happens now?" Lena asked. "James is gone. The ring is recovered. The threat is over. Does that mean our agreement is finished?" "That depends." Victor carefully transferred Ethan back to his crib, tucking the blanket around him with practiced ease. "What do you want to happen?" "I want the truth. About the birth certificate, about whether you're really going to let us go, about what you expect from me now that the situation is resolved." Victor turned to face her fully. "The birth certificate can be corrected whenever you want. I'll have my lawyers file the paperwork tomorrow, if that's what you choose. As for letting you go, you were never really captive. You're free to leave anytime with the financial support I promised and the assurance that you'll never see me again." "And what you expect?" "Nothing." Victor's voice was quiet but firm. "I expect nothing, Lena. But I'm hoping, and this is entirely selfish, that you might consider staying, Not as my prisoner or my responsibility, but as, I don't know what to call it, a friend? Someone I care about? Someone whose presence in my life makes me remember that I'm more than just the monster I become when business requires it. Lena's breath caught. She'd expected many things from this conversation, but not vulnerability, not honesty, not this raw admission from a man who'd killed someone hours earlier. "You care about us," she said slowly, testing the words. "More than I should. More than is probably wise." Victor ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it further. "When I hold Ethan, when I see you building a life here despite everything, I remember what it felt like to have family, to have people worth protecting. My mother died protecting me, and I swore I'd never let anyone else I cared about be put in that position. But here you are, and I can't seem to maintain the distance I know I should. Maybe distance isn't what either of us needs right now." And Lena stood, moving closer to where Victor stood by the crib. "Maybe we both need someone who understands that the world isn't simple, that survival sometimes requires compromise, that choosing the lesser evil is still a choice worth making. You're talking about staying, actually staying, not just until some arbitrary deadline, but staying. I'm talking about not running from the first real stability I've had in years, just because it comes from an unconventional source." Lena looked down at Ethan, sleeping peacefully. "He deserves better than a mother who's always scared, always struggling, always one disaster away from losing everything. And I deserve better than to keep pretending I can do this alone when I clearly can't." "This isn't charity," Victor said firmly. "If you stay, it's because we're building something together. A family, maybe, or at least a partnership. I won't have you feeling obligated or trapped." "Then don't make it about obligation. Make it about choice. I'm choosing to stay because I want to, because I think Ethan might actually thrive here, because—" She hesitated, then decided to be as honest as he'd been. "Because I'm starting to see the man beneath the reputation, and I like what I see. Even knowing what you did tonight, maybe especially knowing what you did tonight, because it means you keep your promises." Victor stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You understand what this means? Staying here, being associated with me, raising Ethan in this world, the dangers, the complications, the fact that my enemies might eventually see you as targets? I understand that danger exists everywhere. At least here I have someone willing to face it with me instead of running away when things get hard." Lena reached out tentatively and took Victor's hand. His fingers were cold, slightly rough, and they closed around hers with careful strength. "I'm not naive, Victor. I know this isn't a fairy tale. But it's real, and it's ours, and that's more than I had before." "This is insane," Victor said, but he was smiling slightly, the hardness finally leaving his eyes. "I kill a man, and hours later, I'm discussing domestic arrangements like we're some kind of normal couple. We're not a couple. We're two people who got thrown together by circumstances and decided to make the best of it." Lena squeezed his hand. "But maybe, eventually, we could be more than that, if you're willing to try." "I'm willing." Victor's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm more than willing, but I need you to understand that I'm not an easy man, Lena. I'm demanding and controlling, and there are parts of my business you'll never be allowed to see. I can't be some perfect domestic partner who comes home at 5 and coaches Little League. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be honest about who you are, to keep us safe, and to maybe try being something other than a crime lord when you're behind this door. Think you can manage that?" "I can try." Victor pulled her closer, not quite an embrace, but close enough that she could feel his warmth, could see the exhaustion and relief and hope warring in his expression. "For you and Ethan, I can try to be better than what I am." "You're already better than you think." Lena rested her head briefly against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder and something uniquely him. "You just need someone to remind you occasionally." They stood like that for several minutes, the silence comfortable now instead of tense. Ethan slept on, oblivious to the turning point happening above his crib. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city's endless soundtrack of chaos and survival. Finally, Victor stepped back, though he kept hold of her hand. "I should go. I have cleanup to handle, reports to file, people to pay off. The practical realities of murder." "Will you come back tomorrow? For dinner, maybe? Nothing formal, just us, getting to know each other without crisis as an intermediary." "I'd like that." Victor lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and unexpectedly sweet. Thank you, Lena, for not running, for seeing past the monster, for giving me a reason to want to be better. Thank you for keeping us safe, for caring when you didn't have to, for being honest about the violence instead of hiding it. Victor left quietly, his security team materializing from shadows to accompany him. Margaret emerged from the guest room once the door closed, her expression knowing. That man is in love with you, she said matter-of-factly. He doesn't know it yet, but he is. Lena felt her face heat. Don't be ridiculous. We barely know each other. I've worked for Mr. Hale for 12 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you and that baby. Whatever this started as, it's becoming something else. Margaret headed toward the kitchen. More coffee? I suspect neither of us is sleeping anytime soon. They sat up talking until nearly 3 a.m, about Victor, about the future, about what it meant to build a life from unconventional foundations. Margaret shared stories from her years working for Victor, painting a picture of a complicated man who demanded loyalty but returned it tenfold, who could be ruthless in business but unexpectedly generous with those he cared about. He's going to want to adopt Ethan legally, Margaret said eventually. Not just the birth certificate fiction, but actual legal adoption. He'll never say it directly, but that boy has gotten under his skin. Mr. Hale wants to be a father, even if he doesn't quite know how. And if I say no, then he'll respect that. But think about what you're giving Ethan, a father who chose him deliberately, who fought to protect him before they'd even met, who's willing to reshape his whole life to make room for family. That's rarer than you think, Lena, even in conventional families. Lena thought about her own father, who'd left when she was 5 and never looked back. About James, who'd disappeared at the first sign of responsibility. About Victor, who'd taken on obligations he didn't have to, who'd killed to keep those obligations, who looked at Ethan like he was something precious and irreplaceable. I'll think about it, she said finally, but she already knew what her answer would be. When morning came, Lena woke to find Ethan fussing for his feeding and sunlight streaming through the windows. The events of the previous night felt surreal in the daylight. Had Victor really confessed to murder? Had she really told him she wanted to stay? Had they really discussed building some kind of future together? Her phone showed a text from Victor, sent at 6 that morning. Good morning. I hope you both slept well. Dinner is still on for tonight if you're agreeable. I'll bring food. You shouldn't have to cook. V. Lena smiled despite herself and typed back a response. We slept fine. Dinner sounds perfect. See you tonight. She fed Ethan, changed him, spent the morning just being a mother without the weight of danger pressing down on them. Margaret arrived with fresh pastries and the news that the media was reporting James Mitchell's death as gang-related violence in the warehouse district. No mention of Victor, no mention of stolen rings, just another casualty of the city's criminal underworld. It's over, Margaret said simply. Really over. You're safe now. But as Lena held her son and looked out at the river flowing past, she realized safety had never been the real question. The question was what she was going to do with that safety, how she was going to build a life worth living instead of just surviving. And maybe, just maybe, she was going to build it with a complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly gentle man who'd entered her life through chaos and stayed because he'd found something worth protecting. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility. That evening, Victor arrived precisely at 7 with enough food for a small army. Italian, from a restaurant Lena recognized as one of the most expensive in the city. He'd changed from his usual suits into dark jeans and a casual button-down, and he carried a wine bottle in one hand and a stuffed elephant in the other. For Ethan, he said, almost sheepishly, holding up the elephant. I realized I've never actually brought him a gift, just practical things like clothes. Lena took the elephant, surprised by its softness, by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. He's 2 months old. He can barely focus on objects more than a foot away. Then he'll grow into it. Victor moved past her into the apartment, setting the food on the kitchen counter with familiar ease. How was your day? Any fallout from last night? You mean besides processing that you committed murder, and I'm apparently fine with it? Lena started unpacking containers, the rich smell of garlic and tomatoes filling the space. No fallout. Margaret said the media is reporting it as gang violence. Because that's what it was, technically. James chose to involve himself with dangerous people. The consequences were inevitable. Victor opened the wine, poured 2 glasses with practiced efficiency. I'm not asking you to celebrate his death, Lena, but I won't apologize for it either. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm just trying to figure out how I feel about everything. Lena accepted the wine glass, took a sip. It was good. Probably expensive, like everything in Victor's world. I keep waiting to feel guilty or horrified, but mostly I just feel relieved. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you practical. You're choosing to focus on the future instead of mourning a past that was never as good as you thought it was. Victor started plating food, moving around her kitchen like he belonged there. James made his choices. You're making yours. The two don't have to be connected. They ate at the dining table overlooking the river, Ethan sleeping peacefully and his bouncer between them. The conversation flowed easier than Lena expected. Victor asking about her day, sharing carefully edited stories from his own business dealings, both of them dancing around the elephant in the room until dessert arrived. I need to tell you something, Victor said, setting down his fork with unusual hesitation. About the birth certificate, and about what I'm hoping you'll agree to. Lena's stomach tightened. What is it? I had my lawyers draw up adoption papers, real ones, not just bureaucratic fiction. If you agree, I'd like to legally adopt Ethan as my son. Victor held up a hand before she could respond. This isn't about ownership or control. It's about giving him my name, my protection, and access to resources that could change his entire life trajectory. College funds, business connections, a legacy that extends beyond what either of us could provide individually. You want to be his father. Actually, legally, his father. I want him to have every advantage I can give him. And yes, selfishly, I want the right to call myself his father. To be present in his life not as some benefactor or family friend, but as the man who chose him deliberately. Victor's voice was rough with emotion. I know I'm not his biological father. I know I have no inherent claim to him. But I love that child, Lena. I didn't expect to, didn't plan for it, but somewhere between protecting him as an obligation and holding him in my arms, it became real. Lena looked at Ethan, at his tiny, sleeping face, at the life Victor was offering him. What about me? Where do I fit in this arrangement? Anywhere you want. Victor leaned forward, his expression intense. You're his mother. Nothing changes that. But if you'll allow it, I'd like us to raise him together. As partners, as co-parents, as whatever we're becoming to each other. We barely know each other, Victor. We've been living in crisis mode since the day we met. What happens when things are actually normal? When there's no danger to bind us together? Then we figure out who we are without the crisis. We learn each other's habits and preferences and all the small mundane things that make up a real relationship. Victor reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, asking permission. I'm not expecting perfection, Lena. I'm expecting effort. I'm expecting honesty. I'm expecting us both to try building something real instead of running because it's complicated. Lena let him take her hand, let herself feel the warmth of his touch, the calluses that spoke of a life far removed from corporate boardrooms. I want to see it. The ring. The thing James stole that started all of this. Victor looked surprised but nodded. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between them. I haven't looked at it since I recovered it last night. I wasn't sure I could. Lena opened the box carefully. Inside was a ring, delicate, old-fashioned, with a small diamond surrounded by intricate filigree. It was beautiful, but not ostentatious, the kind of thing someone wore because it meant something, not because it cost something. Tell me about her, your mother. Victor was quiet for so long that Lena thought he might refuse. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, remembering. She was kind. That's the first thing I remember about her, her kindness. My father was a hard man, violent and controlling, and she was the buffer between his world and mine. She'd read to me every night, these elaborate adventure stories where the hero always won because he was brave and good and honorable. Victor touched the ring box gently. She wore this ring every day, said it was her grandmother's, that it had survived wars and poverty and immigrations, and as long as she wore it, she was connected to everyone who'd come before. How did she die? My father made enemies, powerful ones. They came for him, but he wasn't home. She was. Victor's jaw tightened. She hid me in a closet, told me not to make a sound no matter what I heard. Then she faced them, told them my father wasn't there, that I wasn't there, that they should leave. They didn't believe her. They tortured her for information she didn't have, and when she still wouldn't talk, they killed her. Lena's breath caught. Victor, I'm so sorry. I was 12, old enough to understand what happened, young enough to believe I could have stopped it if I'd been braver. My father found me 3 hours later, still hiding in that closet, refusing to come out. Victor met her eyes, and she saw ancient pain there, carefully controlled but never truly healed. He took her ring before the police arrived, told me it was mine now, that I had to protect it the way she'd protected me. And I did. For 23 years, I kept it safe, until James Mitchell stole it and used it to negotiate for his worthless life. That's why you couldn't let it go. It wasn't about the monetary value. It was the last piece of her I had, the last connection to a time when I believed good people were rewarded and bad people were punished. She died protecting me, and I couldn't even protect her memory well enough to keep her ring safe. Victor took the box back, closed it gently. But I have it now, and I'll never let anyone take it from me again. Lena understood then, really understood, what drove Victor's obsessive need for control. He'd lost the one person who made him feel safe, had failed to protect her, and had spent his entire adult life ensuring he'd never be that powerless again. Every ruthless business decision, every carefully calculated move, every wall he'd built around himself, it all traced back to a 12-year-old boy hiding in a closet while his mother died. You should give it to Ethan someday, she said softly. When he's old enough to understand what it means, what she sacrificed, let him carry that legacy forward. Victor looked at her with something that might have been wonder. You'd trust me with that? With passing on my family's history to your son? Our son. If we're doing this, if you're adopting him and we're building something together, then he's ours. Not mine, not yours, but ours. Lena squeezed his hand. And yes, I trust you. You've earned that. Victor stood abruptly, moved around the table, and pulled Lena to her feet. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she wasn't sure if she wanted him to, or if it was too soon, or if any of this made sense. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her in an embrace that felt like relief and gratitude and promise all at once. Thank you, he whispered against her hair, for seeing past the monster, for giving me a chance to be something better. Lena held him back, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself like he was afraid of breaking her. You're not a monster, Victor. You're just a man who's had to make impossible choices. I understand that better than you think. They stood like that until Ethan woke up crying, shattering the moment with his typical impeccable timing. Lena laughed, pulling away to tend to her son, and Victor watched with an expression that made her chest tight. Can I? He asked, gesturing to the baby. Of course. Victor lifted Ethan with the confidence of someone who'd done it many times now, settling the baby against his shoulder and rocking gently. Hey, troublemaker. Did you miss all the important conversations? Your mother and I are figuring out how to be a family, and you're sleeping through it. Ethan made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been gas. Victor smiled, a real smile, unguarded and genuine, and Lena felt something shift in her chest. This was real. This strange, complicated, unconventional arrangement was becoming something real and precious and worth fighting for. I'll sign the adoption papers, she said, on one condition. Victor looked up, cautious. What condition? You have to promise that when Ethan's old enough to ask questions, you'll tell him the truth. About James, about how we met, about all of it. No sanitized fairy tale version. He deserves to know his story, even the messy parts. Agreed. Though I reserve the right to wait until he's old enough to handle it without being traumatized. Fair enough. Lena moved closer, resting her hand on Ethan's back where Victor held him. What happens now? With us, I mean. We're co-parenting, we're living together, we're building this partnership. But what are we actually to each other? Victor considered this, his free hand coming up to cup Lena's face gently. I think we're two people who found each other under terrible circumstances and decided to make something good from it. The specifics can evolve. We don't have to define everything right now. But you want more than just co-parenting eventually, don't you? Yes. Victor's thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch sending warmth through her entire body. I want everything, Lena. I want to come home to you and Ethan. I want to teach him to ride a bike and help with homework and all the normal father things I never thought I'd have. I want to know what you look like first thing in the morning and what makes you laugh and what books you love. I want to earn the right to call this a real family, not just a protective arrangement. That's terrifying, Lena whispered. The wanting, The hoping. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll have tried. That's more than most people get. Victor leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. I'm not afraid of complicated, Lena. My whole life is complicated, but I'm afraid of losing this before we even see what it could become. Lena closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was gentle and tentative and full of possibility. Victor responded carefully, like he was afraid of pushing too hard, of wanting too much. When they pulled apart, Ethan was staring at them with his unfocused baby eyes, and Victor laughed. I think he approves. He's 2 months old. He approves of anything that doesn't involve diaper changes. But Lena was smiling, feeling lighter than she had in months. Stay tonight. Not in the guest room. I mean, stay with us. Start figuring out what normal looks like. Victor's expression showed surprise and hope and careful restraint. Are you sure? I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. I'm sure. We've done everything backwards already. Might as well keep the trend going. That night, they fell into a routine that felt both foreign and natural. Victor changed into clothes he kept in the guest room. Apparently, he'd been slowly moving belongings into the apartment over the past weeks, preparing for a future he'd hoped for, but never demanded. They took turns feeding Ethan when he woke at midnight, then again at 3, moving around each other in the darkness with surprising coordination. When morning came, Lena woke to find Victor already up, dressed for work, standing by Ethan's crib with an expression of such fierce tenderness that it took her breath away. I have to go, he said quietly when he noticed her watching. Meetings I can't postpone, but I'll be back for dinner, if that's all right. More than all right. This is your home too now, isn't it? I'm hoping it will be. Officially, legally, in every way that matters. Victor moved to the bed, pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'll have my lawyers bring the adoption papers this afternoon. Take your time reviewing them. There's no rush. Victor. She caught his hand. Thank you for all of this. For caring when you didn't have to. For choosing us. Thank you for letting me. He squeezed her hand once and left, and Lena listened to the door close, to the apartment settling into silence, to Ethan's soft breathing from the crib. The lawyers arrived at 2 that afternoon, a team of 3, all professional efficiency and expensive suits. Margaret sat with Lena while they explained the adoption process, the legal ramifications, the rights and responsibilities being established. It was thorough and overwhelming and made everything feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. This gives Mr. Hale full parental rights, the lead lawyer explained. Equal decision-making power regarding Ethan's education, medical care, and general welfare. In the event of your death, Mr. Hale would retain full custody. In the event of Mr. Hale's death, you would retain full custody with access to the trust fund he's establishing in Ethan's name. Trust fund? Lena hadn't heard anything about a trust fund. The lawyer consulted his notes. Mr. Hale is establishing a $10 million trust for Ethan, accessible at age 25 or upon completion of a college degree, whichever comes first. Additional provisions allow for educational expenses, medical emergencies, and other approved uses before that time. Lena felt dizzy. $10 million. Victor was giving her son $10 million just like that, because he decided Ethan deserved security and opportunity. That's too much, she said faintly. Margaret laughed softly. For Mr. Hale, that's a rounding error in his annual revenue. He's not trying to buy Ethan's affection, Lena. He's trying to ensure the child never wants for anything, never has to make the kinds of desperate choices that lead people into dangerous situations. Like the desperate choices Lena had made. Like saying yes to James when she should have known better. Like speaking his name in that hospital room and setting this entire chain of events in motion. She signed the papers with shaking hands, watched the lawyers notarize everything with efficient precision, and then they were gone, and it was real. Victor was going to be Ethan's legal father. They were going to be a family, by law and by choice. That evening, when Victor returned, Lena met him at the door with Ethan in her arms. I signed them, she said. The adoption papers. You're officially going to be his father. Victor's face transformed, joy breaking through his usually controlled expression. You're sure? You don't want more time to think about it? I'm sure. You love him. That's all that matters. Lena transferred Ethan to Victor's arms. Say hi to your daddy, baby. He's official now. Victor held Ethan close, his eyes suspiciously bright. Hello, son. I promise I'm going to do everything I can to be the father you deserve, even if I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. Ethan grabbed Victor's nose, his newest favorite activity, and made a sound that might have been a laugh. Victor laughed back, the sound genuine and unguarded, and Lena felt her heart expand with a feeling she wasn't quite ready to name yet. The next weeks passed in a blur of domestic adjustment. Victor moved his belongings officially into the apartment, claiming half the master closet, and installing his collection of books in the third bedroom they'd converted into a shared office. He worked from home when he could, taking conference calls while holding Ethan, conducting business negotiations with a baby sleeping against his shoulder. Lena watched him transform, slowly but surely, from the cold crime lord into something softer. He was still dangerous. She'd seen him on the phone with associates, heard the steel in his voice when someone failed to meet his expectations. But with her and Ethan, he was gentle, patient, present in ways she'd never expected. They fell into rhythms. Victor made coffee every morning, strong and black, while Lena handled Ethan's first feeding. They took turns with night wakings, though Victor insisted on taking more than his share, claiming he needed less sleep anyway. Margaret visited less frequently now, stepping back to let them build their own routines, though she still appeared for Sunday dinners that became a standing tradition. 1 month after the adoption papers were finalized, Victor came home early from a meeting looking troubled. Lena was on the couch with Ethan, reading to him from one of the children's books Victor had bought. Way too advanced for a 3-month-old, but Ethan seemed to like the sound of her voice regardless. "What's wrong?" she asked, seeing his expression. Victor sat beside her, his shoulders tense. "I received a call from one of my business associates. Someone's been asking questions about you and Ethan, about our arrangement." Fear spiked through Lena's chest. "Who?" "I don't know yet, but they're being careful, using intermediaries, which suggests they understand the implications of investigating my family." Victor's voice was cold now, the crime lord emerging. "I'm increasing security again. No one gets near you or Ethan without going through my people first. Victor, we can't live in fear forever. Eventually I find out who's asking questions, and I eliminate the threat. That's what I do, Lena. I protect what's mine." He pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders solid and reassuring. "I won't let anyone hurt you, either of you. That's a promise." Lena wanted to argue, to insist they couldn't solve every problem with violence, but she understood now that Victor's world operated by different rules. In his world, asking questions about someone's family was a prelude to targeting them, and targets had to be eliminated before they became actual threats. "Okay," she said quietly, "but you have to promise me you'll be careful. Ethan needs his father. I need—" She trailed off, not quite ready to finish that sentence. "You need what?" Victor prompted gently. "I need you safe too, not just for Ethan, for me." Lena met his eyes. "I know we haven't defined what this is between us, but I care about you, Victor. More than I probably should given how we started. And the thought of something happening to you because you're protecting us—" Victor kissed her, cutting off her words, his hand cupping her face like she was something precious. When he pulled back, his expression was fierce. "Nothing is going to happen to me. I've survived far worse than some coward asking questions, and I have too much to live for now to take unnecessary risks." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You and Ethan are my family, my real family. I'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe." The threat never materialized. Victor's people traced the questions back to a rival family testing boundaries, seeing if he'd gone soft with domesticity. Victor's response was swift and unmistakable. A series of business moves that crippled their operations while sending a clear message that his family was completely off limits. Lena heard about it from Margaret, who explained it in terms that made it sound almost civilized. But she knew better. She knew Victor had probably threatened, intimidated, maybe even hurt people to make his point. And the disturbing part was that she couldn't bring herself to care, not when the alternative was putting Ethan in danger. She was becoming someone new, she realized, someone who could accept violence as a tool, who could love a dangerous man without trying to change him, who could build a life in the gray areas between right and wrong. The Lena who'd walked into that hospital 2 months ago wouldn't recognize the woman she was becoming, but maybe that was growth. Maybe becoming a mother meant accepting that the world was complicated and morality was subjective, and protecting your child mattered more than maintaining philosophical purity. On the night of Ethan's 4-month birthday, Victor came home with flowers, not roses or anything romantic, but wildflowers in brilliant colors that reminded Lena of childhood summers. What are these for? She asked, accepting the bouquet. Do I need a reason to bring you flowers? Victor pulled her close, his hands settling on her waist with familiar comfort. Usually people bring flowers for special occasions, Lena said, but she was smiling, burying her face in the blooms to hide how much the gesture affected her. Then consider this a special occasion. 4 months ago, I walked into a hospital room expecting to handle a business problem. Instead, I found a family I didn't know I needed. Victor tilted her chin up, his thumb tracing her jaw. Every day with you and Ethan feels like a gift I don't deserve, but I'm grateful for anyway. Lena set the flowers aside and wrapped her arms around his neck. You deserve more than you think. You just have to let yourself believe it. He kissed her then, deeper than before, with the kind of intensity that came from wanting someone and finally letting yourself have them. When they pulled apart, both breathing harder, Victor's eyes were dark with promise. Ethan's asleep? He asked, his voice rough. Just went down 10 minutes ago. He should give us at least 2 hours if we're lucky. Then let's not waste them. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. What had been partnership and co-parenting evolved into something deeper, more intimate, more real. Lena let herself trust completely, let herself believe that this man who'd killed to protect them could also be gentle and patient and surprisingly tender. Victor shed the last of his carefully maintained distance, letting Lena see the vulnerable parts he'd been protecting since his mother died. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Victor traced patterns on Lena's shoulder and spoke quietly. I need to tell you something about my business, about the things I've done to get where I am. Lena tensed slightly. Do I want to know? Probably not, but you deserve honesty about who I am, about what being with me really means. Victor was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I'm not just a businessman who operates in gray areas, Lena. I've killed people. More than just James. I've ordered executions, eliminated threats, done things that would put me in prison for life if they could ever be proven. I know, Lena said quietly. I'm not naive, Victor. I know what you are. But do you know what that makes you? By staying with me, by raising Ethan in my world, you're complicit. If something ever happens, if the authorities ever build a case against me, they'll look at you too. They'll question whether you knew, whether you helped, whether you're just another criminal hiding behind domesticity. Lena rolled over to face him, her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to give you informed consent, to make sure you understand what you're choosing. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this family. And yes, I understand that means accepting parts of your life I don't love, that I'll probably never love. But the alternative is walking away from the best thing that's ever happened to me because I'm too afraid to embrace complexity. Lena pressed a kiss to his collarbone. I'm not afraid, Victor. Not of you, not of your world, not of the consequences. I'm all in. Victor pulled her closer, his arms tight around her like he was afraid she might disappear. I love you. I should probably say it more romantically with flowers and grand gestures, but I need you to know. I love you, Lena. I love our son. I love the life we're building. It terrifies me how much I love it. I love you too, Lena whispered, and felt something release in her chest. I probably have for weeks now, but I was too scared to admit it, too scared to believe this could be real. It's real. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you. They made love again, slower this time, with the kind of reverence that came from understanding how rare and precious this was. When Ethan woke crying an hour later, they both got up, working together to change him and settle him back to sleep, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, Victor announced he was taking the day off, not just working from home, but actually taking time away from business entirely, something Margaret later told Lena he'd never done in 12 years. We're going out, he declared over breakfast, as a family. Somewhere normal, somewhere we can just be 3 people enjoying the day together. What about security? What about keeping Ethan safe? Security will be there, but discreet, and Ethan is safer now than he's ever been. The message I sent about my family being off limits was received and understood. Victor lifted Ethan from his bouncer, holding him up to eye level. Besides, this little guy needs to see the world beyond apartment walls, don't you, troublemaker? Ethan grabbed at Victor's face, his newest trick, and Victor pretended to be wounded, making Ethan smile. An actual real smile, not just gas. Lena's heart swelled watching them together, this impossible family they'd built from chaos and choice. They went to the botanical gardens, walking the paths while Ethan dozed in the stroller Victor pushed with surprising expertise. Security followed at a distance, invisible until you knew where to look. Other families smiled at them as they passed, seeing nothing more threatening than an attractive couple with their baby, enjoying an autumn day. "This is nice," Lena said, linking her arm through Victor's. "Normal. I'd almost forgotten what normal felt like. This is what I want for us. Days like this where the biggest concern is whether we remembered to pack enough diapers." Victor glanced at her. "I'm transitioning some of my business operations, moving toward more legitimate investments, distancing myself from the activities that carry the highest risk." Lena stopped walking. "Because of us? Because I have reasons to plan for a future now. Because I want to be around to watch Ethan grow up, to teach him how to be a better man than I am. Because I want to deserve you, even if I know I never fully will." "You already deserve us, Victor. You chose us when you didn't have to. You protected us when we were vulnerable. You became a father not because of biology, but because of love." Lena touched his face gently. "That makes you more of a man than most people who claim the title." They found a quiet spot by the koi pond and sat on a bench, watching the fish glide through the water in lazy circles. Ethan woke up, and Victor lifted him from the stroller, pointing out the fish, the trees, the other families, narrating the world in a soft voice that made Lena fall even more deeply in love with him. "I want to marry you," Victor said suddenly, not looking at her, his attention ostensibly on Ethan. "Not right away. I know we need more time, need to be sure, but eventually. I want you to be my wife, legally and publicly. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours." Lena's breath caught. That's quite a declaration to make while watching koi fish. "Would you prefer I waited for a more romantic setting, got down on one knee with a ring and rehearsed speeches?" Victor finally looked at her and she saw vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she might refuse. "I'm not good at romance, Lena. I'm better at honesty. And honestly, I can't imagine my future without you in it." "Then stop imagining and start living it." "Yes, Victor, eventually, when we're both ready, yes, I'll marry you." Lena kissed him softly, aware of the families around them, of the normalcy of the moment. "But you're wrong about not being romantic. This, right here, right now, with our son between us and the whole world ahead of us, this is more romantic than any grand gesture could ever be." Victor's smile was pure joy, unguarded and beautiful. "I'm going to hold you to that. When the time comes, you don't get to complain that I didn't propose properly. I wouldn't dream of it." They stayed at the gardens until Ethan got fussy and hungry, then drove home through the city that had once felt hostile but now felt like possibility. That evening, Victor made dinner while Lena bathed Ethan, and they ate together talking about mundane things like preschool options and whether they should get a dog. Normal couple things, normal family things, building the kind of life neither had thought they'd have. The weeks turned into months. Ethan grew, hitting milestones that Victor documented with the enthusiasm of any proud father. First time rolling over. First solid food. First tooth. Each achievement was celebrated, photographed, entered into the baby book Margaret had given them. Victor continued transitioning his business, bringing Lena into the process more than she expected. He showed her the legitimate investments he was building: real estate developments, tech startups, renewable energy projects. Things that would provide income and security without the constant threat of violence and legal consequences. "I'm not going completely clean," he admitted one night, reviewing contracts at the dining table while Lena fed Ethan. "There are obligations I can't walk away from, relationships that have to be maintained, but I'm creating distance, building walls between the dangerous parts of my life and our family." "I appreciate that. More than you know." Lena shifted Ethan to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "But I also understand you can't just erase your past. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking myself to become someone better, for you, for Ethan, for the future I want us to have." Victor set down the contract he'd been reviewing. "My lawyer contacted me today about James's death certificate. It's been officially filed. There's no longer any legal investigation, no loose ends that could come back to hurt us." It was the first time either of them had mentioned James in months. Lena had almost forgotten about him, about the man who'd fathered Ethan but never been a father, who'd set these events in motion with his greed and cowardice. "Do you ever feel guilty?" she asked quietly. "About killing him?" Victor considered this seriously. "No. James made choices that led directly to his death. He stole from me, used your child as leverage, and was prepared to sell you out to save himself. I feel no more guilt about eliminating him than I would about removing any other threat to my family. That should probably disturb me more than it does. But it doesn't, because you understand that in my world, mercy is often just delayed consequence. I showed James mercy the first time he stole from me, gave him a chance to return what he'd taken and walk away. He chose escalation instead. His death was the natural result of his own decisions." Lena thought about this while she settled Ethan in his crib for the night. Victor was right, in a way that felt simultaneously brutal and logical. James had made his choices. They'd all made choices. The difference was that she and Victor were living with the consequences and building something good, while James had run until he couldn't run anymore. On Ethan's 6-month birthday, Victor came home early with a large envelope and a nervous expression that immediately put Lena on alert. "What is it?" she asked, taking the envelope. "Open it." Inside were property deeds, legal documents, financial statements. It took Lena several minutes to understand what she was looking at. Victor had purchased a house, not an apartment, but an actual house in one of the city's best neighborhoods. 4 bedrooms, a yard, a neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. "I know we haven't talked about moving," Victor said, watching her face carefully. "And if you're happy here, we can stay. But I thought Ethan might want a yard to play in when he's older, space to run around, maybe a dog like we discussed. A home that's really ours, not just an apartment I put you in for protection." Lena looked at the photos included with the deeds. A beautiful craftsman-style house with a porch and mature trees and everything she'd dreamed about when she'd let herself dream about the future. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's exactly enough. It's what you deserve. What our family deserves." Victor moved closer, his hands on her shoulders. "I want to build a life with you, Lena. A real life, in a real home, with everything that comes with it. PTA meetings and neighborhood barbecues and all the normal things I never thought I'd have. You're really serious about going legitimate, aren't you? As legitimate as I can be while maintaining the connections that keep us safe. I'll always have ties to my old life. That's unavoidable. But I want our home to be separate from that. I want Ethan to grow up somewhere that feels safe and normal, where the worst thing he has to worry about is homework and curfews." Lena threw her arms around Victor's neck, the photos scattering across the floor. "Yes. Yes to the house. Yes to the future you're building. Yes to all of it." They moved 3 weeks later, Victor's people handling the logistics with the same efficiency they brought to everything. The house was even more beautiful in person. Hardwood floors that gleamed in the sunlight, a kitchen with enough space for actual cooking, bedrooms they could personalize instead of just occupy. Margaret helped Lena set up the nursery, decorating it in soft blues and greens with hand-painted murals of forests and animals. Victor's office occupied the room next door, lined with bookshelves and equipped with security features that reminded Lena he'd never fully leave his old life behind. But the heart of the house was the living room, with its comfortable furniture and large windows overlooking the yard. It was there that they spent most evenings, Victor reading while Lena played with Ethan on the floor, or all 3 of them watching movies together, Ethan dozing between them. One evening in early spring, when Ethan was 8 months old and learning to crawl with determined enthusiasm, Victor brought up a subject they'd been dancing around for months. "I want to correct James's name on the birth certificate," he said, not looking up from the book he was reading. "Not to remove my name, the adoption is final and legal, but to acknowledge the biological reality. Ethan should know where he came from, even if it's not something we celebrate." Lena had been expecting this conversation, had been thinking about it herself as Ethan got older and more aware. "You think he deserves the truth?" "I think he deserves accurate information about his history, about his biological father's flaws and failures, about how we came together, about all of it." Victor set down his book, finally meeting her eyes. "I don't want him growing up with lies, Lena, even comfortable lies. When he's old enough to understand, I want to tell him everything, about James, about how I became his father, about the choices we made and why we made them. That's going to be a complicated conversation. Everything about our family is complicated, but it's also real and built on choices instead of just circumstances. That matters." Victor moved to sit beside her on the floor, reaching out to tickle Ethan's stomach. I'm his father in every way that counts. But James's biology is part of his story, and pretending otherwise doesn't serve anyone. Okay, let's correct it. Put James's name as the biological father section, yours in the legal father section. Be honest about the complexity. Lena leaned against Victor's shoulder. And when he's old enough to ask questions, we'll answer them. All of them. Even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Because you're right, he deserves the truth. They had the birth certificate amended the following week, the lawyers handling it with the same discretion they brought to all of Victor's affairs. The new document listed James Mitchell as biological father, Victor Hale as adoptive father and legal guardian, making Ethan's story part of the official record. Summer arrived, and with it, a different kind of challenge. Victor's business associates began questioning his transformation, seeing his domesticity as weakness. There were whispers that he'd gone soft, that his focus on family had compromised his edge, that perhaps it was time for new leadership in certain operations. Lena heard about it from Margaret, who'd come for Sunday dinner looking more concerned than usual. "There's talk," Margaret said quietly, while Victor played with Ethan in the yard. "Some of Mr. Hale's former associates think his retirement from certain activities means he's vulnerable. They're testing boundaries, seeing if he'll respond with his old strength or if fatherhood has made him complacent." "What does that mean for us?" Lena asked, fear creeping up her spine. "It means Mr. Hale is going to have to make a statement, show them that choosing family doesn't mean abandoning power." Margaret's expression was grim. "I've seen him handle situations like this before. It's not going to be pleasant." That night, after Ethan was asleep, Lena confronted Victor about the whispers. He admitted that, yes, there were challenges to his authority, and yes, he was going to have to address them. "I thought you were going legitimate," Lena said, trying to keep the accusation from her voice. "I am, but legitimate doesn't mean powerless. I still have obligations, still have people who depend on me, still have a reputation to maintain." Victor pulled her close, his hands firm on her waist. "I'm not the man I was 6 months ago, Lena, but I'm also not someone who can be pushed around or dismissed. If I show weakness now, everyone we care about becomes a target. So what are you going to do?" "What I've always done. Remove the threat decisively enough that no one else questions my commitment to protecting what's mine." Victor's expression was hard now, the crime lord emerging. "I need you to trust me, to understand that the violence I'm about to employ isn't who I am anymore, but it's what's necessary to keep our family safe." Lena wanted to argue, to demand a peaceful solution, to insist there had to be another way, but she'd learned enough about Victor's world to know that sometimes violence was the only language that communicated clearly. "Do what you need to do," she said quietly. "Just come home safe." Victor left that night with a team of his most trusted people. Lena stayed up waiting, pacing the living room with the baby monitor in her hand, jumping at every sound. Margaret had stayed, offering silent companionship, both women understanding what was at stake. Victor returned 3 hours later, his clothes slightly disheveled but no visible injuries. The look in his eyes was cold, distant, the man who'd killed James Mitchell staring back at her. "It's handled," he said flatly. "There won't be any more questions about my commitment or my strength." "Did you kill them?" Lena asked, needing to know. "I made examples. Whether that involved death or just ruined lives is irrelevant. The message was received." Victor moved past her toward the bathroom. "I need to shower. Clean off the evidence of being who I used to be." Lena followed him, watching as he stripped off his clothes with sharp, angry movements. When he stepped into the shower, she stripped too and joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind as hot water cascaded over them both. "You're not who you used to be," she said against his back. "You're who you chose to become. Tonight was just protecting that choice." Victor turned in her arms, his expression raw. "I didn't want you to see this part. The part that solves problems with threats and violence and terror. I wanted to keep that separate from our home, from our family. We don't get to compartmentalize, Victor. Your business is part of your life, which means it's part of our life. I'd rather know the truth than live in deliberate ignorance." Lena reached up to cup his face. "You did what you had to do to protect us. I'm not going to punish you for that." "I love you," Victor said, his voice breaking slightly. "I love you so much it terrifies me. The thought of losing you, of losing Ethan, of having this all fall apart because I can't fully escape who I was." "You're not going to lose us. We're yours, Victor, For better or worse, in violence and in peace, were yours. Lena pulled him down for a kiss, tasting water in desperation. Now stop spiraling and trust that I meant it when I said I was all in. They made love in the shower, urgent and almost desperate, Victor holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Afterward, they dried off and checked on Ethan together, both needing the reassurance of his peaceful, sleeping face. I never want him to see that side of me, Victor whispered, standing over the crib. The violence, the cruelty, the parts of me that are still monster. Then we teach him better. We show him every day that strength doesn't have to mean violence, that power can be used to protect instead of destroy. We raise him to be the man you're becoming, not the man you were. Lena took his hand. He's going to know his father is complicated, but he's also going to know his father loves him enough to change. The crisis passed. Victor's authority was reestablished, his transition toward legitimate business respected instead of questioned. Life returned to the rhythm they'd established. Victor working from home when possible, Lena managing the household and caring for Ethan, both of them building the future one normal day at a time. On a Saturday morning in October, when Ethan was 10 months old and cruising along furniture with growing confidence, Victor made breakfast while Lena did laundry. The domesticity of it struck her suddenly. How far they'd come from that first impossible phone call. How much had changed in less than a year. "What are you smiling about?" Victor asked, setting a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs in front of her. "Us. This. The fact that the city's most feared crime lord is making me breakfast while our son plays with blocks in the living room. It's absurd and perfect, and nothing like I thought my life would look like." Disappointed? Victor's tone was light, but she heard the genuine question underneath. "Are you kidding? I'm terrified I'm going to wake up and find out this was all some elaborate dream." Lena pulled him down for a kiss. "I love you. I love this life we've built. I love that you're willing to be both the monster when we need protection and the gentle father when Ethan needs comfort. I love all of it. Then marry me. Now, today, without waiting for some perfect moment." Victor pulled a small box from his pocket. He'd apparently been carrying it around, waiting for the right opportunity. "I bought this 3 months ago, and I've been waiting for courage or the perfect romantic setting, but you're right, this is perfect. This morning, this life, this family. Why wait?" Lena opened the box with shaking hands. Inside was a ring, not elaborate or ostentatious, just simple and beautiful, with a single diamond that caught the morning light. "Is that—" "My mother's diamond, reset into a new band. I want you to have her legacy, to carry it forward into our future. To be part of the history she started, and we're continuing." Victor took the ring from the box, holding it ready but not pushing. "Marry me, Lena. Be my wife. Be Ethan's mother. Be the center of the family I never thought I'd have. Say yes." "Yes." The word came out choked with tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." Victor slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her properly, deeply, with all the emotion he usually kept so carefully controlled. Ethan chose that moment to start crying from the living room. Perfect timing as always, and they both laughed. "Welcome to marriage," Lena said. "Romance constantly interrupted by parenting. I wouldn't have it any other way." They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the house, Margaret serving as witness along with 2 of Victor's most trusted associates. No elaborate wedding, no extended guest list, just the people who mattered most promising to build a future together. Ethan was the ring bearer, carried down the makeshift aisle by Margaret since he couldn't walk yet. He grabbed at Lena's dress during the vows, making everyone laugh, and fell asleep on Victor's shoulder during the reception dinner. "Perfect wedding," Victor said later that night, standing in their bedroom while Lena changed out of her simple white dress. "Exactly what we needed. No regrets about not doing something bigger, making a statement to your business associates?" "My business associates received all the statement they need when I married the woman I love and adopted her son. Anyone who doesn't understand what that means isn't paying attention." Victor pulled her close, already working on the zipper of her dress. "Besides, I don't need to prove anything to anyone except you and Ethan, and I plan to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that." The months that followed were the happiest of Lena's life. Victor continued transitioning his business, building legitimate enterprises while carefully extracting himself from the more dangerous operations. It wasn't a clean break, it couldn't be, but it was progress. Movement toward a future where Ethan could be proud of his father's work instead of afraid of it. When Ethan turned 1, They threw a party in the backyard, inviting neighbors and the few friends Lena had started making through mommy groups and library story times. Victor was charming and normal, the perfect suburban father, and no one suspected the life he'd lived or the violence he'd committed. "Look at you," Lena teased later after everyone had gone home and Ethan was asleep upstairs, exhausted from cake and attention. "Hosting birthday parties and making small talk about lawn care. You're dangerously close to normal." Normal is relative, but I admit, I enjoyed it. Watching Ethan destroy his birthday cake, seeing him smile at everyone, knowing we're giving him the childhood neither of us had. Victor pulled her onto his lap on the porch swing, both of them watching the stars emerge. "I'm happy, Lena. Actually, genuinely happy. I didn't think I was capable of it anymore." "You're capable of more than you know. You just needed permission to try." They sat in comfortable silence, the swing creaking gently, the night air soft with the promise of summer. Inside the house, the baby monitor crackled with the sound of Ethan's soft breathing. "I've been thinking about the future," Victor said eventually, "about giving Ethan siblings, about expanding our family." Lena's breath caught. They discussed it vaguely, but hearing Victor say it out loud made it real. "You want more children?" "I want everything with you. More children, more years, more ordinary moments that become extraordinary because we're sharing them. I want to be the kind of father who shows up to every school play and coaches soccer teams and embarrasses his teenagers." Victor's hand settled on her stomach, gentle and hopeful. "What do you think?" "I think I'd love to give Ethan a brother or sister. I think I'd love to build this family even bigger, even stronger." Lena covered his hand with hers. "I think I'd love to have your child, Victor. Not James's, not anyone else's. Yours. A baby who's ours from the beginning." Victor kissed her temple, his arms tightening. "Then let's start trying. Let's build the family we both dreamed about but never thought we'd have." 6 months later, Lena found out she was pregnant. Victor's reaction was pure joy, lifting her off her feet despite her protests, calling Margaret immediately, spending the evening talking to Ethan about being a big brother even though the toddler had no idea what any of it meant. "We're doing this," Victor kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're actually doing this. We've been doing this for over a year," Lena reminded him. "This is just the next chapter." But it felt significant, this baby who would be theirs from conception, proof that they'd built something real and lasting, that the family they'd created from chaos had become something stable enough to expand. The pregnancy was easier than Lena's first, with Victor attending every doctor's appointment, reading parenting books with the same intensity he brought to business contracts, preparing the nursery with meticulous attention to detail. Ethan was fascinated by Lena's growing belly, patting it gently and babbling nonsense that they chose to interpret as excitement about his sibling. On a snowy February morning, Lena went into labor 3 weeks before her due date. Victor drove her to the hospital with white knuckles, terrified despite all his preparation. This time, there were no difficult questions about the father, no judgment about their circumstances. Just staff who treated them like any other expectant parents, bringing them to a private room and offering encouragement. Victor stayed by Lena's side through every contraction, every moment of pain, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When their daughter finally arrived, screaming her displeasure at the world, Victor cried, actual tears streaming down his face as he held their child for the first time. "She's perfect," he kept saying. "She's absolutely perfect." They named her Elena, after Victor's mother, a way of honoring the woman whose ring Lena wore, whose legacy of protection and sacrifice had shaped the man Victor had become. Margaret cried when they told her the name, and even Victor's usually composed lawyer seemed moved when filing the birth certificate. This time there were no complications, no lies, no danger. Just a family welcoming a new member, celebrating life instead of surviving crisis. When they brought Elena home, Ethan was initially suspicious of this tiny creature who demanded so much attention. But Victor sat with him patiently, explaining about being a big brother, letting him help with small tasks, making sure he understood his place in the family was secure. "You're still my first son," Victor told Ethan seriously, the toddler sitting on his lap while Lena nursed Elena. "You made me a father. You taught me how to love like this. Elena is lucky to have you as her big brother." Ethan seemed to understand on some level, snuggling against Victor's chest and watching his sister with growing curiosity instead of resentment. As months passed and Elena grew, the family found new rhythms. Victor reduced his business commitments even further, spending more time at home, prioritizing family dinners and bedtime stories over late-night meetings. He still maintained enough connections to keep them safe, still commanded respect in his diminished circles, but he'd successfully transformed from crime lord to businessman, from threat to pillar of the community. Lena watched him change, watched him choose gentleness over violence day after day, and fell more in love with him with each passing year. He wasn't perfect. He still had a temper, still solved certain problems with intimidation rather than negotiation, still carried the weight of his past in the shadows behind his eyes. But he was trying, constantly trying to be better than what he'd been. On their third anniversary, Victor gave Lena a letter instead of a gift. She opened it in their bedroom while he watched nervously. My dearest Lena, 3 years ago, I received an impossible phone call about a baby who wasn't mine, but who I claimed anyway. I thought I was solving a business problem. I had no idea I was finding salvation. You've given me everything I never knew I needed. A family, a home, a reason to be better than my worst impulses. Every day with you and our children reminds me that redemption isn't a destination but a choice, made over and over in small moments and large decisions. I'm not the man I was when we met. I'm not even the man I was last year. I'm constantly becoming someone new, someone shaped by your love and our children's trust. It's terrifying and exhilarating and more meaningful than any power I ever held. Thank you for seeing past the monster. Thank you for believing I could change. Thank you for building this beautiful, chaotic, perfect life with me. All my love for all my days. Victor. Lena read it 3 times, crying harder with each pass. When she finally looked up, Victor was watching her with the same vulnerable expression he'd worn that first night in the hospital. I mean every word, he said quietly. I know. Lena pulled him close, the letter clutched between them. I love you. I love the man you've become, the father you are, the husband who writes me love letters instead of buying expensive jewelry. I could still buy expensive jewelry if you want. I have your mother's ring. That's all the jewelry I need. Lena kissed him softly. You're all I need, Victor. You and our family and this life we've built together. Years passed. Ethan started preschool, excelling in ways that made Victor burst with pride. Elena grew into a fearless toddler who climbed everything and feared nothing, just like her father. They added a dog to the family, then another baby, a son they named Thomas after Lena's grandfather. The house filled with noise and chaos and joy. Victor coached Ethan's soccer team, attended Elena's dance recitals, spent hours building block towers with Thomas that the baby would gleefully destroy. He was present for every milestone, every crisis, every ordinary moment that built a childhood. Lena went back to school, getting the degree she'd abandoned when she got pregnant with Ethan. Victor supported her unconditionally, hiring extra help for the children, rearranging his schedule to accommodate her classes, celebrating her graduation with the same enthusiasm he brought to the kids' achievements. They were building a legacy, not of crime or violence or fear, but of family and love and choosing each other every single day. It wasn't the life either of them had expected. It was infinitely better. On Ethan's 10th birthday, the boy asked the question they'd been preparing for. Dad, why does my birth certificate have 2 names in the father section? Victor looked at Lena, who nodded encouragement. They'd agreed to tell the truth when he was ready, and apparently he was ready. Come sit with me, Victor said, gesturing to the porch swing where he'd proposed to Lena all those years ago. I'm going to tell you a story about how I became your father. It's complicated, and some parts are hard to hear, but it's the truth, and you deserve the truth. Ethan climbed onto the swing, still small enough to fit comfortably under Victor's arm. Lena sat on the porch steps with Elena and Thomas, all of them listening as Victor told the story, about James, about the stolen ring, about the hospital phone call that changed everything. He didn't sugarcoat it. He explained about James's theft, about being a crime lord, about the violence that had solved the problem. He talked about choice and consequence, about how Ethan's biological father had made terrible decisions, but that didn't make Ethan responsible for them. So you're not my real dad? Ethan asked quietly when the story was finished. I'm your real father in every way that counts, Victor said firmly. I chose you before you were even born. I protected you and your mother when you needed it most. I've been there for every scraped knee and bad dream and birthday party. Biology doesn't make a family, Ethan. Choice does. Love does. And I chose to love you from the first moment I saw you. Ethan was quiet for a long time, processing. Finally, he looked up at Victor with serious eyes that reminded Lena painfully of James, but with a steadiness that was all Victor. I'm glad you chose us, Ethan said simply. I'm glad you're my dad. Well, Victor pulled him close, his eyes wet. I'm glad too, son. Every single day, I'm grateful I made that choice. That night, after the children were asleep, Victor and Lena sat in their bedroom talking about the conversation, about Ethan's response, about the relief of finally sharing the truth. He took it better than I expected, Victor admitted. I was afraid he'd be angry or confused or feel like we'd lied to him. We gave him the truth at the right time, in the right way. That's all we could do. Lena curled against Victor's side, her head on his shoulder. And he's right to be glad you chose us. I'm glad every day too. No regrets? About any of it? Not a single one. Even the hard parts led us here. I wouldn't change any of it. Victor kissed her forehead, his arms tight around her. I love you. I love our family. I love this life we've built from impossible circumstances. It's more than I ever dreamed I could have. But then stop dreaming and keep living it. We've got years ahead of us, Victor. Let's make them count. And they did. They made every year count, every day matter, every moment with their children precious. Victor continued his transformation, becoming known in their community not as a former crime lord, but as a devoted father and philanthropic businessman. He funded schools and community centers, using his resources to create opportunities for others the way he'd created them for his own family. Lena became a counselor, working with single mothers and at-risk youth, helping others navigate the kinds of impossible situations she'd once faced. She spoke openly about her story, the pregnancy, the abandonment, the choice to accept help from an unlikely source. She became an advocate for second chances and unconventional families. Their children grew up knowing their story, understanding the complexity of their origins, but never doubting they were loved. Ethan became a lawyer, choosing to work in family court, helping kids in difficult situations. Elena became a teacher, working with children who needed extra support. Thomas followed in Victor's footsteps, but chose legitimate business from the start, building on his father's success without his father's history. On Victor's 60th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren, because yes, their kids had grown and started families of their own, Lena raised a glass to toast her husband. 30 years ago, I made the most terrifying decision of my life. I accepted protection from a stranger, trusted a man I had every reason to fear, and chose to build a future instead of running from an impossible present. Victor Hale, you've spent 3 decades proving that choice was the best one I ever made. Happy birthday to the man who chose us first. Victor stood, pulling Lena into his arms in front of everyone, and kissed her properly. Their grandchildren made exaggerated gagging sounds while their adult children laughed, and Margaret, still with them after all these years, wiped away happy tears. Thank you, Victor said when he finally released Lena, for seeing the man I could become, for believing I was worth saving, for building this beautiful chaos with me. He looked around at their family, at the legacy they'd created. I was a monster when we met. You made me human again. You were always human, Lena corrected gently. You just needed permission to be vulnerable, to let yourself be loved. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was finally quiet, Victor and Lena stood in Ethan's old room, now a guest room, but still containing traces of his childhood. Photos on the walls showed the journey they'd taken, from that first hospital picture to graduations and weddings and grandbabies. We did it, Victor said quietly. We built a family from nothing. From chaos and fear and desperation, we created something that lasted. We did it together. That's what matters. Lena took his hand, the ring he'd given her all those years ago, still gleaming on her finger. I love you, Victor Hale. Former crime lord, current teddy bear, eternal father and husband. All of it, all of you, forever. Forever, Victor agreed and pulled her close. Through every impossible choice, every hard moment, every beautiful day. Forever. And that was their story. Not a fairy tale, but something better. Something real and hard-won and built on choice instead of chance. A family forged in crisis, strengthened by love, and proven by time. The city's most feared crime lord had become someone better. The desperate single mother had become someone stronger. And together, they'd created a legacy that would outlast them both. Children who knew they were chosen, grandchildren who understood that family was about love, not blood, and a future built on the principle that people could change if they had reasons to try. It wasn't the ending Lena had imagined that day in the hospital when Victor first walked in. It was infinitely better. It was real, and it was theirs.